Well, good morning. Welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Olumide Macaulay. The headlines. The White House, Turkey, others welcome Finland to NATO as talks over Sweden's membership continue. Russia warns Finland's accession to NATO a dangerous, historic mistake. Plus, Finland's President Sauli Niinisto says Finland working hard to secure Sweden's NATO membership. Top of the morning to you. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre has welcomed Finland to the NATO alliance, calling it a historic day. Finland's accession, ending 7 decades of military non-alignment, roughly doubles the length of the border that the North Atlantic Treaty Organization NATO shares with Russia, and bolsters its eastern flank as the war in Ukraine grinds on with no resolution in sight. And Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu handed Finland's NATO ratification document to U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken on the sidelines of the Brussels summit. Turkey's parliament approved the bill for Finland's accession to NATO last week, clearing the way for the country to become part of the Western Defense Alliance as war rages on in Ukraine. Turkish parliament was the last amongst the 30 members of the alliance to ratify Finland's membership after Hungary's legislature approved a similar bill earlier this week.
This is a historic day because we are soon going to celebrate Finland's membership in our NATO alliance, and that is truly a historic occasion.
I'm very happy to hand over to submit the instrument of ratification to you today, and I would like to welcome Finland as a new ally, and with Finland now our alliance is much more stronger.
This is an historic.
Now, people across Finland took stock of the reality of NATO membership with a mix of acclaim and equanimity as the geopolitical fallout played out from Moscow's invasion of their neighbor Ukraine. Retired Finnish combat engineer Ilkka Länsi-Vaara, sporting a camouflage cap and fatigue pants, had hung his own NATO flag from the side of the squat brick house where he lives in Virolahti, near the Russian border, due east of Helsinki.
Combat engineer. So this morning when I woke first, so I cook a mug of coffee and drank it, and then I lift the flag and then another mug of coffee, and then take some pictures from the flag. Something has now changed, and then our people they told last winter to the government that we want that Finland join the NATO, and that was very good thing to when we noticed that. First, the government was said, well, but people said, yes. And that's a kiss way to. Why? A special day for Finland, of course, and I have special memories from that too.
In the meantime, at a flag-raising ceremony outside the alliance's headquarters, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg commended the Finnish armed forces, calling them substantial and highly capable. The flag-raising ceremony was also attended by the Finnish President Sauli Niinisto, its Foreign Minister Pekka Haavisto, and other government ministries.
This is an historic day. We welcome Finland as the newest member of our alliance. We will raise the Finnish flag for the first time here at the NATO headquarters. On the 4th of April 1949, the Washington Treaty. Your forces are substantial and highly capable. Your resilience is second to none. And for many years, troops from Finland and NATO countries have worked side by side as partners. From today, we stand together as allies.
Finland's membership is not complete without that of Sweden. Our persistent efforts for a rapid Swedish membership will continue. I look forward to seeing Sweden join us as the 32nd member at the Vilnius summit in July.
Let me start by welcoming Finland as the newest member of our alliance.
This is the moment NATO members welcomed Finland, the newest member of their military alliance, with a round of applause. More rounds of applause. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg also joined the clapping at the NATO headquarters. Finland's Foreign Minister Pekka Haavisto was seen celebrating the occasion.
A privilege to have you now as a full-fledged member, and as we stated so clearly also outside, soon we also have Sweden as a full-fledged member of our alliance. Let me start by welcoming Finland as the newest member of our alliance.
Russia is not receiving this news well. As it said, Finland's accession to the NATO military alliance was a dangerous historic mistake that will weaken security in the wider region, as well as increase the risk of conflict and force Moscow to take countermeasures, in their words. In Moscow, pro-Kremlin activists held a noisy anti-NATO demonstration outside the US Embassy, holding up placards with slogans such as "Stop NATO" and "NATO is a sponsor of Nazism." Russia and Finland share a 800-mile border, and Moscow has already said it will beef up military divisions stationed to its west and northwest. Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu told Russia's military leadership that Finland's accession creates the risk of a significant expansion of the conflict, adding that it will not affect the outcome of what Russia calls its special military operation in Ukraine. And in a moment, we're talking to Dr. Olena Snyder, expert at the Global Center for Studies Strategy in Ukraine, joining us from Florence in Italy. Good morning. You're welcome to the program.
Good morning, and thank you for the invitation.
You're welcome. Now, how is Russia to take, now that Russia is taking this not in a good way, obviously, isn't it rubbing salt in the wound for the celebratory aspect of NATO and NATO's allies and the United States, calling it a historic occasion, knowing that pacifists and those who want to bring this war to an end describe it as not a good thing for bringing the war to an end?
Well, Actually, it has nothing to do with bringing the war to an end, because from the very start, Russia speculated over NATO enlargement as the threat to Russia, though Russia had very good institutional cooperation with NATO and undermined it by itself. And NATO has never been a threat to Russia. But on the other hand, Russia never asked. But Russia didn't dare to attack a tiny Estonia with a 1.5 million people population, or Lithuania or Latvia, those Baltic states who managed to join NATO quite fast. So it's the question, who is the threat? To whom? Yes, here. Nobody is the threat to Russia of Russian Western neighbors, but Russia attacks its neighbors all the time.
Now, I ask you that question because Russia perceives NATO as a threat. Russia perceives the expansion of NATO along its borders, now including Finland, very soon to come, probably Sweden, if Turkey doesn't have anything to say about it, as a threat. And knowing that this has happened, what can the international community do to further help Russia to see that this aggression is not the way to go?
Well, international community has nothing to do with that, because Russia has to stop this war. Russia itself has to withdraw its forces from Ukraine. And NATO is again, I will answer again, it's not a threat to Russia, it's a defensive bloc. NATO doesn't attack anyone. And this you may also, well, one may also say that Ukraine is a threat to Russia, and Russia also says that Russia attacks Ukraine because Russia considers Ukraine as a threat to Russia. It's just a ridiculous point. Ukraine was never a threat to Russia. And now we see who is killing civilians on which territory. It's not Ukraine that's fighting on Russia's territory, but it's Russia that is killing and destroying cities and killing civilians in Ukraine. So it's the question. You repeat here Russian narratives, how Russia describes the world, that Russia tries to convince everyone that Russia is a victim of West, but it's not true. Russia is the aggressor, and we can see it not from Russian words, but from Russian actions. So we have to look at actions, but not to listen to the words. So it's not about NATO, it's about Russia's behavior. Russia had all, as I repeat again, Russia had all institutional capabilities for cooperation in security sphere in Europe, and still has institutional capabilities on the UN level, for example, to create sustainable peace and sustainable cooperation all over the globe. But it doesn't do it. Russia doesn't do it because Russia is not interested in peace. Russia is interested in renewal of its glory, military glory, and it's of renewal of, as they call it, Russian Empire. Soviet Union and of Russian Empire. That means that they deny the sovereignty not only of Ukraine but also of Baltic states, of Poland, also of Finland. So Russia will move further if it isn't stopped.
So, Doctor, I'm only repeating Russia's narratives, as you've pointed out, because those are Russia's narratives. That's what they're saying. That is the reason they're preferring, not that we are in any concert or agreement with that. It is for those who would like to see some sort of mediation take place, that now that Finland is part of the deal for NATO against Russia, that this doesn't help the fact that Russia continues to say that they are the victims, as you've pointed out. But concerning Finland now, could you speak to the point of what they bring to the table? We understand that they have a very capable armed forces, and they can even call up a number of reserves in the hundreds of thousands?
Well, we will see what kind of forces will be deployed or will be situated on the Finnish territory. But again, I will repeat that Russia had a Russia-NATO Council, had this mechanism of consultation and cooperation. And it just destroyed everything. So now if Russia wants to come back to security negotiations with the countries which are terribly afraid of Russia and terribly concerned about its security, Russia has to stop its aggression and start negotiating. But till then, Russia will see what is happening, that countries are afraid of the aggressor, the biggest aggressor in Europe, who started the biggest war in Europe since the Second World War. And those countries will do everything to strengthen their defense. For example, Poland now is talking about the nuclear weapon in its territory. And it's really escalating, but it's not the fault of Poland, but it's the fault of the country which is the threat to Poland, to Finland, to Estonia, to Lithuania, to Latvia, and other countries on the eastern flank of Europe. So it's just a matter of will of Kremlin and the will of Russian leadership to take into account these concerns of security concerns of European countries, to stop the aggression in Ukraine and to start negotiating again. Russia is welcomed for negotiations and for security talks about European security, but at first it has to stop, and it will be stopped.
Do you think this will force Russia to the negotiating table? For instance, let's take this initial reaction that we just reported that is going to force Moscow to take countermeasures. Are you concerned that they will take countermeasures, and what form those countermeasures might be?
I don't know actually. They announced it already. They announced that they're going to deploy tactical nuclear weapons on the territory of Belarus. So this is the kind of countermeasure, and they can. If we speak about the Northern Europe and the Baltic region, there we can expect some malign actions and undermining security actions in the sea, for example, with the energy infrastructure and with this any infrastructure of these states in the sea, in the Baltic Sea and in the Northern Sea. So because Russia already was stopped few times, their Russian saboteur troops were stopped by the northern countries, not European countries in that region. So we may face these kind of reactions, and also we may see attempts to increase its spy presence in these countries to like Russian spy net was quite destroyed by European countries, and now we see new attempts of rebuilding this net of spies. So this may be the second point. And I hardly can imagine that Russia will start any open military activity against those NATO countries in the Northern Europe. So because Russia is already it's failed in Ukraine, and it cannot continue. It cannot open another battlefront with the NATO country in Europe. But some saboteur actions and some malign influence, yes, we may see it definitely. And of course, Belarus must be under very big attention.
So, finally, Dr. Olena, let's do a little conflict resolution arithmetic. So adding Finland to the fray makes it a definite thing that if anything happens along the border with Finland from Russia, it involves NATO. Adding Sweden to the fray and Poland, the same thing. What does this do for the bid of Ukraine to join NATO?
If I understood your question,
does this help? Does this help NATO's? Does this help NATO's bid to join? Ukraine's bid to join NATO?
Yeah, Ukraine still really wants to join NATO, and I think that it will happen not immediately, but it will happen after the end of this war. Because Ukraine is already highly integrated in NATO militarily and institutionally. So we are in already, and we cooperate, we coordinate, we have quite very, very close partnership. I think and we have our army obviously is one of the strongest, if not the strongest one in Europe. I do not speak about Russia, of course. So NATO, after this war, NATO would be also interested in having Ukraine as its partner and as its member. But it will happen not immediately, definitely, because we all know that it's still the policy of Western countries and of NATO countries. They try not to make it NATO-Russia conflict, but they try to keep it in frames of Ukrainian borders.
Totally understood. And of course, our sympathy remains with the Ukrainian people who've suffered great psychological and physical trauma, and even displacement for those who've left the country to escape this aggression from Russia. Thank you so much, Dr. Olena Snyder, expert at the Center of Global Studies Strategy, Ukraine, joining us from Italy. Thank you so much for being a part of the program this morning.
Bye.
After the break, Kremlin says not taking optimistic view of Nord Stream despite insurance renewals. Details in a moment. Please stay with us. Welcome back to our special coverage of Russian invasion. More reactions now to the Finnish membership of NATO. The Finnish Defense Minister, Antti Kaikkonen, said his country joining NATO represents a big day for Finland. British Foreign Minister James Cleverly said ahead of the NATO meeting that the Scandinavian countries' accession was the direct result of Vladimir Putin's aggression and his illegal invasion of Ukraine. Ukraine Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba said he hoped his country would move along the same path soon. And Sweden's Foreign Minister Tobias Billström called on Turkey and Hungary to support their application.
It's a big day for Finland, of course. And I'd say it's a win-win situation. It's good for NATO also. But our next goal is, of course, to get our good neighbor Sweden to the full membership.
Today that we see as, I think, a direct result of Vladimir Putin's aggression and his illegal invasion of Ukraine, the day where a new ally joins our defensive alliance. I think that is very positive. We will celebrate that today and then very quickly get to work on the accession of Sweden.
And we sincerely congratulate our Finnish friends with the accession. Ukraine is aiming at reaching the same goal, becoming a full member of NATO, and it will be one of the topics of our conversations here in Brussels of how can we move forward.
There is no reason for neither the Turkish parliament or the Hungarian parliament to make any further delays. They should start the ratification process because we have the support of all member states in NATO to become invitees, and thereby we have fulfilled all the requirements.
Finland appears to be reportedly looking out for its neighbor Sweden, as the Finnish president Sauli Niinisto said his country will work hard to secure Sweden's membership of NATO as well. Finland and Sweden applied together to join NATO following Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. Of NATO's existing members, Hungary and Turkey have still to ratify Sweden's membership application. Niinisto said Finland's most significant contribution to NATO's common deterrence and defense will be to defend its own territory.
That Finns are very happy already now.
How historic is this moment? You was born 19.
Russia always.
Meanwhile, the United Nations Human Rights Council overwhelmingly voted in favor of extending the mandate of an investigative body probing possible war crimes committed since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. 28 countries voted in favor extending the mandate of the Independent International Commission of Inquiry on Ukraine by a year, while 17 abstained and 2 voted against the body, which Ukraine says is essential for keeping Russia accountable for its crimes.
The votes will shortly be uploaded on the...
Putin's war has caused dire humanitarian consequences in Ukraine, throughout Europe, and around the world. And the forcible transfer and deportation of Ukraine's children is truly sickening.
A draft as such can only intensify contradiction and confrontation, and it's not conducive to the peaceful settlement of the Ukraine crisis via diplomacy. China will therefore call for a vote and vote against the draft resolution.
Mr. President, we believe that this resolution will not bring parties closer to securing this dialogue. Rather than contributing to the resolution of the conflict, this resolution may serve to drive a deeper wedge between the parties. South Africa will therefore vote to abstain on this matter. I thank you for your attention.
Meanwhile, Russia's Commissioner for Children's Rights, Maria Lvova-Belova, dismissed International Criminal Court allegations that she was responsible for unlawfully deporting children from Ukraine as false. The Hague-based ICC on March 17th issued arrest warrants for Russian President Vladimir Putin and the Children's Commissioner Maria Lvova-Belova for the war crime of unlawfully deporting children from areas of Ukraine occupied by Russian forces. The ICC said it had information that hundreds of children had been taken from orphanages and children's care homes in areas of Ukraine claimed by Russia, according to the ICC. Some of those children had been given up for adoption in Russia. Lvova-Belova told a news conference in Moscow that the consent of the children's parents had always been sought, that the commission acted in the best interest of any child, and that it was more accurate to talk of guardianship rather than adoption. In the meantime, the United Nations Human Rights Council has demanded that Russia provide access to and information about Ukrainian children and other civilians forcibly transferred to territory under its control. The top UN rights body passed a resolution demanding that Moscow cease the unlawful forced transfer and deportation of civilians and other protected persons within Ukraine or to the Russian Federation. The Kremlin's alleged deportation of tens of thousands of children from war-ravaged Ukraine to Russia or areas occupied by Russian forces has been a hot button throughout the nearly 6-week session of the Geneva-based council. Kyiv maintains that more than 16,000 Ukrainian children have been deported to Russia as of February this year. Now I would like to talk to Barrister Chukwu Emeka Eze, former lecturer on diplomatic and consular relations law, Faculty of Law, Nasarawa State University, Kefi, who's with us in the studios this morning. Thank you for making out the time to be with us.
Thank you. I'm grateful for inviting me.
Could you enlighten us on where the lines blur concerning international law and the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court? We have the arrest warrants issued by the International Criminal Court for the president of a country. And we have now this situation concerning the alleged adoption of children or deportation of children by the Russians in Moscow-controlled territory in Ukraine to Russia. How much teeth does the ICC have in situations such as this?
The ICC has enormous powers under the Rome Treaty concerning its actions, and though Russia is not a member of the ICC, but Russia is a member of the United Nations, and we have had situations where a non-member of the ICC was referred to the ICC. For instance, Sudan, as at the time the former president was referred to the ICC, who was not a member of the ICC, although it signed, but had not ratified the convention, that is the Rome Treaty. So, but at that time, the United Nations Security Council referred Sudan, Omar al-Bashir, the then president, referred him to the ICC. So what happens is that in this situation where Russia, that is not a member, neither the United States is a member. Yes, but though not a member, member states are compelled to arrest any person upon whose head a warrant is hanging like the sword of Damocles. So the controversy now is that the BRICS wants to have a convention, a conference in South Africa. I know the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, yes, South Africa is one of them. So during that conference, South Africa is supposed to arrest Putin in obedience or in compliance with its obligations under the Rome Treaty, establishing the ICC. So failure to do so will amount to non-compliance. So juxtapose this with the Vienna Convention on immunity, I mean the immunity of heads of state and diplomatic persons. So basically, if South Africa is not supposed to arrest a head of state, a head of government, but the ICC, by its provisions, has suspended or has parties to it have suspended their rights to rely upon the provisions of any other law granting immunity to heads of state. So there is no immunity for Putin. The South Africa will be sitting between the Scylla and the Charybdis, trying to repeat what it did during the visitation of President Omar al-Bashir of Sudan to South Africa some years ago, when South Africa refused to detain him, to arrest him.
Well, you're correct. It's like being caught between a rock and a hard place.
Sure.
But how easy is it? So I understand everything you've said concerning the ICC's jurisdictions and the involvement of the United Nations. But when we're talking about the head of a country, we're talking about the president of a country. Doesn't that cause a terrible escalation in the event that it does happen?
No,
that Putin, well, obviously,
no, it will happen.
In a real life situation.
No, in a real life situation, but theoretically, I was doing theoretical analysis.
Okay.
In a real life situation, South Africa does not contemplate to arrest Putin. No, it will not happen. It is as sure as anything. South Africa will not.
Then therefore, what other measures can be taken by the ICC? Do they talk to the judiciary of these countries where situations such as this are happening?
Judiciary does not enforce. Recall the case of Omar al-Bashir.
Yes.
When he had left the country, the judiciary of South Africa said it was unlawful for South Africa not to have complied with its obligations, knowing that pacta sunt servanda agreements are meant to be kept. And you don't use any local legislation as an excuse not to enforce your obligation under international law. Besides, the allegation against Putin, just like in the case of Omar al-Bashir, is jus cogens. That is to say, there is a principle of international law, that international customary law, that has been elevated by treaty, for which there is no derogation. That is to say, no country is supposed to look for any local law to derogate from a situation where somebody has been accused of war crime and a warrant is hanging on the person's head, whether a head of state or not, and the person will be allowed freedom, especially when you are a member of the ICC. But that is theory. In practice, many countries will not effect the arrest of Putin, whether they are members of the ICC or not, because of some other fallouts that are realistic in nature.
Well said. And given that now that the ICC has said this, going forward, to which, as you've pointed out, which is the US is not a signatory, Russia is not a signatory, they're basically ignoring them.
Israel, no, some of them signed, but they did not proceed to ratification. Merely signing a treaty, if a treaty provides for steps, and the ratification or accession will be the final step. If you sign only, it will not make you a member. Do you get it?
Obviously, but that's a vote of no confidence.
No, so basically they are not members. But some of them, like US, observe, especially when it appeals to it. Like in this situation, when ICC warrant of arrest is hanging on Putin, definitely US, I don't think, in the nearest future, will be welcoming Putin. But South Africa, Brazil, Russia, India, China will never arrest Putin. Never.
Let's look at the final points of another part of this ICC involvement, where the Russian Commissioner for Children's Rights is dismissing the ICC's allegations that she was responsible for unlawfully deporting children from Ukraine as false. Again, this devolves into another country and the ICC's jurisdictions. To where does the burden of proof lie?
No, her case is different. She's not a sitting head of state. If she visits any country that is a member of the ICC, there is greater likelihood that she will be arrested.
They've not issued a warrant for her arrest yet.
Nevertheless, they will hold her.
Really?
Yes, but the situation now is that, recall what happened in the case of former Yugoslavia. The Serbian general made all these arguments, but certainly he was arrested and taken to The Hague. So if this woman should proceed to any country that does not have special relationship with Russia, she will be arrested. So her case will be worse off, more than the case of Putin, who is a sitting head of state, and we have more than one convention protecting Putin. Besides, this is a world power. As we speak, in this month of April, from last Saturday, 1st April, Russia is the sitting president
Council
of the 15-member United Nations Security Council, of which 5 are permanent members. So who are you? Who are you to dare Russia to arrest their president? Even this will be the worst time to arrest the Commissioner for Children's Affairs. So this month of April, Russia retains the headship of the United Nations Security Council.
Now, therefore, for this, because we keep coming back to it, that this is an escalation and things don't seem to be getting better, they seem to be getting worse, diplomatically speaking, and this aggression from Russia and this invasion just continues, and these dimensions of events happening on the side with the Finland membership of NATO. And with the Swedish proposed membership of NATO, and Poland as well, is just making things even worse.
You recall that Russia has called it a historic mistake. Do you know why? Finland was, up to the 19th century, the eastern part of Sweden, but was eventually taken over by Russia. It was during the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917 that Finland became independent, but actually got its independence May 1918. So, and became a member of the League of Nations 1920. Recall,
prior to the United Nations.
Yes, but recall that when Russia became uncomfortable with the nearness of Finland territory to Leningrad, it invaded Finland on 30th November 1939, and the war lasted till 13th March 1940, so, which led to the Treaty of Moscow. Now, Finland had always been on the eye of Russia. It donated, it gave 9% of its territory to Russia for peace to reign. 9%. And Russia used it as a bulwark against the invasion of Germany. So that conditioned Finland to be neutral, to avoid such type of war again. So now with Finland's membership of NATO, it will make it a permanent enemy of Russia. And Sweden, wanting to become a member of NATO, will make it a permanent enemy of Russia. Russia has threatened to deploy tactical nuclear weapons close to its borders.
Thank you for that. Thank you for exposing that to us again. Why Russia will be extremely upset with what's going on with that membership from Finland. Thank you so much, Barrister Chukwemeka is a lecturer, former lecturer, diplomatic and consular relations law, Faculty of Law, Nasarawa State University in Kefi.
Thank you.
Coming up, British boxers to boycott men's world championships in Tashkent, Uzbekistan. Details in a moment. Please stay with us. Welcome back. A Russian businessman who fled house arrest in Italy, where he was facing extradition to the United States, says he's back in Russia Artem Ars was arrested in Italy. He was due to face charges in the U.S. of shipping oil from Venezuela in breach of sanctions and of bank fraud. He escaped from house arrest at his home on the outskirts of Milan last month, triggering an alarm on his electronic tag hours after a court ordered him to be extradited to the United States, albeit to face only 2 of the 4 counts with which he was charged. It declined to allow him to face charges of smuggling military technology from the U.S. to Russia and money laundering. However, he said that the charges against him were politically motivated. And now joining us is Ini John Mekwa, our business correspondent, to give us a business perspective on the war in Ukraine and how where the pendulum is swinging and where the domino is falling. Gazprom has resumed gas exports to China. Yeah. How will this affect things?
Yeah, so this is just after 1 week of maintenance. There was a week maintenance of gas, of the pipeline, the Power Siberia pipeline, which supplies gas from Russia through Gazprom through Monrovia to China. But I think the bigger part of the story is that China has increased its consumption of oil and gas from Russia. I mean, the oil doesn't come as a surprise because we've always talked about it because, I mean, apart from the price cap that has been placed on Russia's oil, China and India have been buying cheap oil from Russia, I mean, since last year. So that shouldn't come. But I mean, the other thing is that Russia earned $18.6 billion from China alone between January last year and January this year. So I'm just trying to say that in spite of the sanction, Russia has still been able to maintain a certain level of revenue from countries like China, India, Saudi Arabia now, and some other friendly countries that they call friendly countries. You know, so for China alone to have spent about 18.6, and we've seen their imports of Russian oil and gas surge more than 30% in 1 year. I mean, where is the sting of the sanction, you know, which has been placed on Russia? I guess that's another question.
And another big player is India, who are pitching themselves as a reliable alternative to SpaceX.
Yeah, well,
what's that about?
Yeah, because though it's war, people are dying, infrastructure is being destroyed, countries are losing, energy cost is surging as well as food, but countries are also making the most, placing themselves in strategic positions, you know, to make the most of some of it. So it happens that Russia, I mean, we're not that very developed and all of that, so there's be a major provider of internet for a lot of countries. So now, because of the sanctions, countries are alienating themselves from dealing with Russia. There is a vacuum. Who is going to be providing that fast speed internet? So India has now come into that space, and that space is worth about $447 billion. It was worth about $447 billion in 2020, and it's going to be worth about $600 billion in 2025. That's in 2 years. Wow. So, I mean, they're placing themselves in strategic positioning, I would call this, because they just launched about 3 dozen communication satellites last month. So it may not start working immediately, but they're actually placing themselves strategically for countries like Nigeria, unfortunately, that might need internet, and we cannot provide it. We don't have the infrastructure to do it ourselves. Then we might have to tap into countries like this, and it's revenue for the economy.
Wow. So when it rains, it pours for the other side.
Yes.
Thank you, Ini.
Thank you for having me.
Ini John Mekwa, please join her for Business Morning after this program. In the meantime, Wagner founder Yevgeny Prigozhin visited the site of a blast in a cafe in the Russian city of St. Petersburg, in which Russian military blogger Vladimir Tatarsky was killed. Now, Prigozhin, a vocal ally of Russian President Vladimir Putin and frequent visitor to the Donbass front line, paid his respects to the well-known war blogger in the video published on social media. Tatarsky, a cheerleader for Russia's military campaign in Ukraine, whose real name was Maxim Fomin, was killed on Sunday in a cafe where he was due to talk. Speaking to a group of his supporters in St. Petersburg, He said that Tatarsky was a person who was trying to consolidate society around the fight against the enemy from outside. Now, British boxers will not take part in the men's amateur world championships in Tashkent after the country also boycotted last month's women's event in India and mounting concern about the sport's Olympic future. The men's tournament starts on April 30th in the Uzbek capital and runs to May the 14th. Great Britain Boxing has said in February it announced a boycott of the women's championship, that it was reviewing participation in the men's. It says the decision reflects an ongoing concern about the future of boxing on the Olympic program and the recent decision by the IBA to allow teams of boxers from Russia and Belarus to compete under the national flag. And that's today's special coverage of Russian invasion. I'm Olumide Macaulay. Thank you for watching. Have a good day.